Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Tcherchian, Chief Product Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at XYPRO. And thank you for joining our virtual TBC presentation today. This is new for me as well. Normally, I'm up on stage and looking at all your smiling faces and seeing your reactions as we're walking through the discussion. But I think this one's going to be just as good. So today we're going to be talking about modernizing your cybersecurity strategy. And we'll talk about all the pieces that we need to put together to build an effective way to combat threats that exist right now and going forward. So I'll be in the chat room, and if there's any questions or comments or thoughts, I'm more than happy to have a discussion while we're going through this presentation. So please put your questions in the chat room, and I'll be fully available to address them. A little bit about XYPRO. We've been in the mission critical computing space for nearly 4 years now. We're headquartered just outside of Los Angeles, California, and I'm staring at sunny blue sky and 80-degree weather. Not to make anybody jealous, but I would not have it any other way in November. So XYPRO's got expertise in nonstop cybersecurity, compliance, and we've recently added database management to our portfolio. We've got a very strong partnership with HPE. In fact, a couple of our solutions come packaged as part of the operating system. We've also got some very new partnerships with companies like Sailpoint and CyberArk and Servicenow, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And our focus over the last few years has been our proven and patented security intelligence and analytics technology. And we'll spend the latter half of this presentation discussing how all of the concepts we're going to be talking about today come together as far as analytics and threat detection go. So XYPRO is ultimately your trusted security partner. We're your one-stop shop when it comes to anything cybersecurity related. And we do that by focusing on 3 key tenets, mainly integration, modernization, and innovation. With integration, we want to make sure that the nonstop can play in your IT ecosystem just like any other platform or application can. So leveraging your existing enterprise investments and making sure the nonstop can participate. So things like Sailpoint and CyberArk and ServiceNow and Splunk, we've got partnerships with all of these companies. So not only have we developed partnerships, we've developed solutions that'll help you seamlessly integrate nonstop with these technologies. So if you ever have a need to integrate with anything like this and beyond, please come talk to us and let us know. If we're not already working or have a solution for you, we're probably working on something in the background. Modernization will allow you to bring the nonstop into a new type of era, into management and visibility and enhancing the user experience the way we are used to working in the 21st century. And we've got some concepts and really cool stuff, technology focusing around that. And innovation is staying ahead of the curve, is making sure that we're not just playing catch up, but XYPRO is always scanning the horizon for what's next, what's going to benefit our customers the most, and making sure that our strategic alignment is in lockstep with what your strategic direction is as a customer, to make sure that whatever you've got on your roadmap, we're addressing it with technology as your trusted security partner. XYPRO's got over 700 customers worldwide, spread across 6 continents. We've got a globally distributed sales and support organization, so we've got folks that can work with you in your time zone. And we're also fluent in over 24 different languages. So if you're more comfortable communicating in a language other than English, we've probably got somebody on our staff that can facilitate that. So jumping into our presentation, and we'll set a little bit of background on where we are in terms of the state of cybersecurity. This number, I'm sure you've seen in my previous presentation, is not going down. It's almost 2021, and the average time to identify and contain a breach is over 280 days now. And this is from the most recent IBM Cost of Data Breach report that came out back in June. 280 days. Now, that's a little shocking considering it's almost 2021, but when you put it in context with the pandemic that we're currently in, maybe it's not so shocking, but it is, at the end of the day, it is reality. And the average cost of a breach is almost $4 million. Now, that's not going down either. And in fact, that's a number we expect to increase as breaches get more sophisticated and larger and more damaging, that number is going to go up. Now, this number is impacted by smaller companies that $4 million is a significant amount for them. It could literally mean the difference between opening your doors the next day and being completely out of business. $4 million for a large company is also nothing, it's no chump change. It could be a significant impact to the budget or other things that money could be better spent on. So how do we combat these things? We'll focus on some of the technologies and the processes and the procedures we need to put in place to make sure that we can bring these numbers down. So ultimately, security needs to be viewed as a business risk, just like any other business risk. Supply chain risks, financial risk, pandemic risk. Cybersecurity needs to be the same part of the conversation. One thing to keep in mind is compliance is not security. We often hear it at, we're compliant, so we don't need to worry about anything else. But compliance is the minimum you need to be doing. All compliance is lessons learned from the past and applying them for the present to make sure that those things don't happen again. That's the minimum you should be doing. We should be looking much further afield to make sure that we've got the proper controls and processes and procedures and technology in place to properly mitigate our risk. Security also needs to be treated as a culture. It's not a function of your technology department or your IT department. It needs to be an overall cultural change within the organization. And the only way security is going to flourish and get the attention it needs is if it's considered important from the top down, meaning the board and the C-level. And to that point, security does need to have a space in, or have a seat in the boardroom. It's just like you have your CFO and your CIO and your CEO as part of that conversation. Your CSO and your CISO need to be part of that conversation because, like we talked about, a security breach could be significant enough where do we stay in business or are we out of business? But ultimately, in today's world, is every company at risk? Yes, you're at risk. It's just understanding the level of risk and then applying the right processes, procedures, and technology in place to mitigate that risk to a comfortable level. This is Bruce Schneier. He's a very famous cryptographer talking about how difficult it really is to evaluate risk. Is more people are killed every year by pigs than by sharks, which shows how good we are at evaluating risk. I don't remember the last time I saw the news report on somebody being killed by a pig, but I'm seeing constantly people being attacked by sharks. And it just goes to show you how good we are at evaluating this risk. So the key here to understand, yes, we do want to support a culture of cybersecurity awareness. The next step now is to identify what our risk is to make sure that we put the proper tools and strategy in place to help mitigate that. So who are we up against? And these guys are getting more and more sophisticated every single day. And the pandemic has given them the opportunity to even mobilize closer and be more strategic in their attempts to get into our networks. It's external hackers. They're still the biggest source of compromise. And this can come in the term of, in the scope of organized crime. This can be state-sponsored attackers. These can be organized hacking groups. It's no longer the 12-year-old sitting in their parents' basement running some scripts. That's no longer what a hacker is. These are actually organized crime groups that are going after you. So all these phishing attempts that are coming through your email box, that's not one-offs. There's some real strategy and effort going and funding going behind those types of attacks. Malicious insiders are also a real threat. This is people within your organization that you've hired, that you've trusted with certain levels of access to do certain things that you need to propel your company forward. And this is folks that are misusing that trust. These can be very, very difficult to detect because they are actually trusted with the access, with the tools necessary for them to do their job, but they're misusing it. How do you detect that? We'll talk about user behavior in a little while. Third-party partners and contractors and vendors are also huge risks to a lot of organizations. Now that everybody's distributed and working from home, VPNs have become a critical tool necessary to continue doing our jobs. Our third-party contractors and vendors also need access in sometimes to our network. So giving them VPN access allows them to log into our network and do their jobs like they're supposed to. But how do we ensure that the proper controls and procedures and security that we have in place for our organization extend to their organization? And we've seen a lot of data breaches recently where the third-party contractor is the one that got compromised, and their access into our network allowed the hacker to get in and compromise our network. So that's something we need to pay attention to. As well as human error is still an issue. And this can be somebody inadvertently weakening controls on your system and allowing an hacker to get in and exploit that. So why isn't security more of a focus? Why do we have these misconceptions that exist? Well, some of the things I've personally heard is we only have specific users that access an application or a system. So it's only 3 or 4 users that log in, so we don't need to worry about security that much. We trust them. We just talked about what the malicious insider has the capability of doing. Excuse me. We have firewalls. But again, if I can get an admin or an HR person or a finance person to click on a phishing email that looks legitimate and get them to install a keylogger or screen scraper or ransomware, your firewalls are irrelevant. They mean nothing at that point. Or we're PCI compliant, or we're NERC-CIP compliant, or GDPR compliant. Again, compliance is not security. Compliance is the absolute minimum you need to be doing. And my favorite one of all is our systems are not connected to the internet. We don't have to worry. Again, if your system is connected via network cable, if it has any type of network connectivity, if you give a hacker 6 months, 8 months on your network, it doesn't matter if you feel like your systems aren't connected to the internet. They'll figure out a way to continuously get in and get to the target that they're intending to get to. So this is not a viable security strategy. And then what I hear often is we just don't have the time, we don't have the money. But how quickly does that tone change when somebody gets compromised? All of a sudden, if there's a data breach, they have the time, they have the money. That shouldn't be a strategy. We should be focusing the time and the money to put into proactive detection, proactive controls, proactive hardening, rather than waiting for something to happen and then paying the price for that and then mobilizing that, yes, this is something critical that we need to pay attention to. But ultimately, all that being said, its security best practices are not being followed. And what that means is password hygiene is not properly being implemented. So people are still using weak passwords. People are still storing their passwords in insecure methods. People are still sharing passwords, and people are giving away their passwords by falling victim to phishing attempts. And if I'm a hacker, the easiest way for me to compromise your system is to have access to your username and password. It's not sitting in front of 20 computer screens with green source code flying by, with me banging away on my keyboard and beep boop sounds coming out of my computer. That's not a hacker. A hacker is trying to get at your username and password and log in as you, and then trying to log in and then trying to compromise the next person and the next person and the next person. So just like if a burglar were to rob your house, the easiest way for them to get into your house is to look under your mat, find the key, walk in through your front door. Your username and password is essentially your key. If they can compromise that and walk in through the front door, they don't have to do anything more difficult. But once they're in, it's very hard to get them out. That initial compromise is the biggest risk. If they can get in and let's say compromise your email account, your Office 365 or your G Suite email account, now they're in as you. They can log in as you, and they can target other individuals in your organization by sending them emails because they appear to be coming from you or within the organization. Now that becomes easier. Now that can be more targeted and focused, and they can compromise the next person and the next person and the next person. That's why it takes us 6 months, 7 months, 8 months to detect that they're there, because they're hiding their activity as innocuous user behavior. So they're installing, along this process, they're installing malware, they're installing screen scrapers, they're installing keyloggers, they're living off the land, they're pivoting around your system, they're settling in, and they're gathering more and more data, more and more reconnaissance to allow them to elevate permissions and get into the next target and the next target and the next target. But the key here is that initial compromise is being able to protect yourself and your organization from being compromised at all. Again, it goes back to passwords. This is this is something that is still more prevalent than ever. It's falling for fake job interviews, and these hackers have figured out a way that, taking advantage of the pandemic, where everybody's looking for jobs, everybody's looking for new career paths and opportunities, and to move around, that there's a big market in targeting job seekers here. How are they doing that? They're searching LinkedIn, they're searching resume databases, they're searching for people that are posting about looking for jobs, Glassdoor, Indeed, those types of things, and building a profile about you. Once they have that profile, now they can specifically target you with a job offer. You're going to respond in most cases because you're out there actually looking for a job. But these guys have got clever enough where they send you a job offer, and then they set up an interview. They'll set up a fake interview, but they'll want you to download some sort of interview tool or webcam teleconference tool onto your workstation so they can have this job interview for you. They're not stopping there. Obviously, that thing you're downloading onto your workstation has a malicious payload attached to it. But for them to add some credibility to what they're doing, and you don't think anything of it, they'll actually set up an interview. There'll actually be somebody on the other end of the line having a video conference with you and interviewing you. That way, you're less likely to consider what you downloaded on your computer to be suspicious. You actually had a valid interview. So they're compromising a lot of systems that way by getting you to download the payload, do their dirty work for them. How do you keep them out? First line of defense is security awareness, is training your employees, getting in and making sure that they understand that they shouldn't be downloading these types of things to their workstation. They shouldn't be clicking on phishing emails, that they should be using strong passwords, is giving them the training. But this only works if it's supported from the top down. You can't sell cybersecurity awareness from the bottom up. It's just not going to go anywhere. So as long as your top level, your CEO, your board, your C-level is properly supporting this initiative, it'll work. But if they're not, if they see it as an inconvenience, it's not going to gain much steam behind it. What are the things you should be doing? No default passwords, no weak passwords, no sharing of passwords, vault your passwords. All of these things need to be addressed. Password management is key here. Password management is not writing your passwords on a sticky note and putting them on the bottom of your keyboard, or putting your passwords in a password.xls file on your desktop. That's not password management. Proper password management is putting your passwords into a vault and then having policies applied to those passwords to rotate them for complexity, for usage, for expiration. All of that needs to come into play. So XYPRO has recently partnered up with a company called CyberArk. Most of you, I'm sure, have CyberArk in your environment. CyberArk is the market leader in password vaulting and privilege access management. All a password vault is, it's no different than storing your money in a bank vault, but instead of storing money, you're storing passwords in a vault. Now that vault takes over by applying policies to those passwords, to those credentials being stored in the vault. It'll address password complexity. It'll address password length. It'll address password rotation and expiration. That means the password can be rotated every 12 hours, 24 hours, or what have you, based on policy. CyberArk will take care of that whole thing. So you no longer need to store your password in a file or on the whiteboard or on a sticky note on your monitor. So as I mentioned, a lot of you have CyberArk in your environment, and CyberArk does a phenomenal job at password management, but the Nonstop could never participate in that environment because of the unique personalities of Nonstop. It was always a manual process. So passwords get vaulted in CyberArk. CyberArk rotates the passwords, for example, the super password, but then the password would fall out of sync with Nonstop. How do you address that? Well, an email would go to the Nonstop administrator, they'd log into Safeguard and match up the password to what was in CyberArk. This takes time, this takes energy, this takes manual effort. This is a risk. This is one of those risks we were talking about. How do you address that challenge? Well, XYPRO worked with CyberArk collectively, and we've developed a Nonstop to CyberArk integration. This is the first and only CyberArk certified integration that exists for Nonstop. What it does is it'll allow you to bring your Nonstop into the CyberArk fold. So the same way your Active Directory or your IBM mainframe or your Salesforce or other privileged credentials get vaulted and managed through CyberArk, Nonstop can now work the same way. What this does for your Nonstop is huge. It allows you to vault your passwords, manage your passwords, rotate your password based on all of the functionalities CyberArk provides. We don't stop at just safeguard passwords though. You can extend this capability to your Nonstop CLIM passwords as well. Your CLIMs, your storage CLIM, your network CLIM, your telco CLIMs all have passwords, so you can manage those. Those can now be vaulted within CyberArk, and the same password policies that apply to any other passwords in your environment can now apply to your Nonstop users and your Nonstop CLIM users. Again, this is the only CyberArk certified integration for Nonstop. And this works out of the box. It's a very quick installation, takes a few minutes, and immediate value for something like this. So your Nonstop now can be properly secured with and addressed with proper password vaulting. Similarly to CyberArk, we've also partnered with a company called Sailpoint, who's the market leader in identity and access management, meaning when a user is, let's say John Smith is hired into your company and you want to create an identity for John Smith, you would typically do that within Sailpoint, and then you check the boxes saying John Smith needs access to Active Directory, needs access to Office 365, needs access to Lucidchart, needs access to Salesforce, and needs access to Nonstop. But Nonstop's never been an option there because there's never been a connection or integration between Nonstop and Sailpoint. So what would happen is an email would be sent to the Nonstop administrator saying, go ahead and create John Smith an ID and give them access. Again, manual process requires somebody to take that email, log into Safeguard, and run through commands to enable John Smith's access. Manual process, error prone, introduces risk. Well, what we did is we worked with Sailpoint to develop the first and only Nonstop certified or a Sailpoint certified integration for Nonstop. So our XYPRO identity connector will allow you to have Nonstop as an option. So when you create a user within Sailpoint, when you create an identity within Sailpoint, you can select Nonstop as an option. Now, more importantly, to address the biggest risk here is user identity deprovisioning, meaning John Smith has left my company. I would go into Sailpoint, disable John Smith's identity, and it would disable all of the systems that he has access to. Without the identity connector for Sailpoint, Nonstop again would be a manual process. An email would have to go to an administrator, and an administrator would log into Nonstop, disable John Smith's access. They might do this 24, 72 hours later after the access was supposed to be disabled, or maybe never do it. An audit catches this flag or raises this flag that you've got stale IDs on your system that are 6 months old, 12 months old, and gives you an audit warning. With our Nonstop identity connector for Sailpoint, all of that now goes away. All of that manual process, all of that compliance risk, all of that potential for user error goes away. So the same way you would provision an identity in Sailpoint for any other platform, now Nonstop can participate in that picture. Nonstop becomes an option. You onboard John Smith, you select Nonstop as an option. John Smith's identity and password immediately get created on the Nonstop. With this integration and the Sailpoint integration, not only will the CyberArk integration, not only will you create the identity for John Smith on the Nonstop, but now his password can be vaulted within CyberArk, and all of the password policies within CyberArk take into effect. Our identity connector for Sailpoint allows you to provision, like I said, more importantly, deprovision, and aggregate and reconcile all of the IDs. So very quick installation, 15, 20 minutes in most cases, and you would, the initial aggregation would take all of your Nonstop user IDs and correlate them within Sailpoint. We can help you out with that, very simple to do, but provides maximum value and removes a lot of manual processes and a lot of risk out of the picture. Okay, so how do we keep them out? We talked about the risk. We talked about how they could potentially get in using passwords, using credentials, using identities to get in. But now that we've got that addressed, how do we keep them out? Let's say we really want to take a firm stance on preventing any type of user logging in who doesn't have access to our system. It's not relying on passwords ultimately, but that's not reality. We've got to rely on passwords because we've got users that need to use passwords. We've got service accounts for machine-to-machine authentication. We've got all types of integrations that if we change the password or change the authentication mechanism, we don't know what that will break. So we need to continue relying on passwords. But how do we mitigate the threat from a compromised user account? It's introducing multi-factor authentication and role-based access control. It's the principle of least privilege. Multi-factor authentication will allow us to, even if an account was compromised, if the username and password falls into a hacker's hands, without a second factor, meaning without either a key fob or an RSA token or a multi-factor authentication app on our phone or biometrics, they would not be able to log in. So the username and password to them would be useless. The principle of least privilege, meaning even if they can get in, their access is limited to the minimum amount that they need to do their work. Now, everybody's working from home nowadays, so VPNs have never been more important, but VPNs now become one of our biggest threats. Is because of what a VPN is a user from home would authenticate to the network, and now in most cases they have unfettered access to the network. They can do whatever they want. They can access whatever systems and applications and data stores that they need to do their job. This is a big risk, like we talked about with third-party contractors and vendors and other folks working from home that need access to VPN. VPN just means you trust anybody. Once they authenticate to your network, you trust them to do what they need to do. We're moving more and more, you'll hear this term more and more, is zero trust security, this concept of zero trust security, that the VPN kind of goes away and everybody has to authenticate themselves to every system that you've got on the network. And not just authenticate themselves, but just-in-time access, meaning elevate your access to what you need to do your job, and then that goes away. So if your credentials were ever compromised, unless you can re-authenticate yourself using certain controls, you're not going to be able to do anything with that access. But ultimately, a lot of what we've talked about thus far with passwords and authentication threats can really be addressed by good password hygiene, password vaulting, password rotation and complexity, and multi-factor authentication. That will take care of 95% of the threats that are out there. What is multi-factor authentication? Obviously, it's your username and password, but it's also one additional factor. It's something you have, like we talked about. It could be the authentication app on your phone. It could be your RSA key fob. It could be a smart card. I don't know if you recently saw Microsoft's advisory note on what multi-factor authenticate or what devices should not be used for multi-factor authentication. An SMS text message or an email is not multi-factor authentication. Email can be compromised, phones can be compromised, text messages can be redirected. That's why it's not a good idea to use SMS or email for that second factor. Use an app, use a key fob, use a smart card for multi-factor authentication, or use biometrics. This can be fingerprint, this can be facial scan, this can be retina scan, but one of those methods should be used and not relying on SMS messages or email. We'll talk about it in a minute, but we're also seeing the adoption of three-factor authentication. So having to require all three of those factors before you can authenticate, and we knew this was coming as attackers' methods get more and more advanced, as technology gets more advanced, their capabilities increase. So two-factor authentication will have a shelf life where we have to introduce three-factor authentication. That's coming. We'll be seeing more and more of that. On the nonstop, you've got the ability to turn on Zygate user authentication. This Zygate user authentication comes with every nonstop server. If you've got a nonstop, you've got user authentication. I'm not selling you anything here. I'm not asking you to buy anything, license anything. You already have this. So you already have the ability for free to turn on multi-factor authentication for your nonstop server. Not only do you have that capability right now out of the box, but XUA, in short for user authentication, provides you with a variety of other functionality. One of the key factors of Zygate user authentication is enriching your authentication data. This becomes critical for security analytics and security incident detection. Without user authentication, you see what the logs look like on the left-hand side. For authentication events, you're going to get the loopback IP address. You're not going to get the source IP address of where that authentication event is coming from. You're going to get a loopback IP address. It's just the nature of nonstop. That's the way it works. With XUA in the picture, not only are you getting two-factor authentication, but you're seeing the source IP, the real source IP address of the authentication event. Again, this is critical for authentication alerting, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. So you already have a Zygate user authentication. If you need help turning it on and configuring it, please come talk to us. We'd be more than happy to help you. This is one of the key ways to mitigate your risk when it comes to authentication threats. With XUA, not only do you get two-factor authentication, you get a variety of other extensions to safeguard authentication capabilities. You can integrate with Active Directory. You can introduce single sign-on. You can integrate with a Radius server. You can introduce date and time validation, meaning users can't log on except for these time windows. You can validate by IP address. You can make sure that users are only logging on from certain IP address or certain subnets. And a variety of other authentication controls. So now that we've got two-factor authentication implemented, we've got XUA turned on, we're enriching our authentication data. What are the things we can do? We can detect just binary and threshold type alerts. So obviously we can send our authentication logs to Splunk. And I'm using Splunk interchangeably here. Splunk can be any SIEM. It can be IBM QRadar. It can be Logarithm. It can be your ELK stack. But for argument's sake, we'll call it Splunk for now. So you can send all of your authentication data to Splunk to detect failed login attempts, successful login attempts to accounts with no activity. You can detect authentication events to disabled accounts or off-hours authentication events. These are use cases that should be in every environment. So once you have Zygate user authentication turned on, you can detect things like this right out of the box. You can just send your data to Splunk and be able to detect these types of authentication events. If you want to get more advanced with your authentication threat detection, we're going to talk about a tool called SecurityOne in a minute that'll give you some very advanced nonstop use cases. The key here is, even with the basic authentication events, without Zygate user authentication in the picture, enriching your data, you're not going to be able to detect any of this. You can send your data to Splunk. Splunk's not going to be able to detect any of these authentication events without Zygate user authentication inserting the enriched data in the picture. So authentication is one source of data. What are the other types of data that exist on the nonstop that we can use for analytics and threat detection? Well, we've got a variety of data available to us through Safeguard. OSS generates data. EMS and your ITP web server generate data. All your different services and protocols like SSH and SSL and others generate their own log files. The Zygate products, like we talked about, user authentication generates log data. Measure, your applications, and more. All of this generates data. How are we going to get access to the data? The key is to capture this data, send it somewhere where we can analyze it and report on it and act on it. That's the key. But one of the main points of this is we've got to get access to the data. It's no good just to collect it. You can collect it, but unless the data gets turned into information, it's just going to take up space, it's going to take up resources, and it's not going to be much useful to you. Zygate Merged Audit is the key here. Zygate Merged Audit comes on your nonstop system. You already have it. Again, I'm not selling you anything. I'm not asking you to license anything. You already have Merged Audit, which means you've got the ability to take all of those data sources we just talked about and integrate those with Splunk, with QRadar, with ELK, with whatever security, intelligence, or analytics tool you want to send the data to. Now, there's other tools on the market that do the exact same thing, but you don't need to even look at those because you've got the ability right now to do this with Merged Audit. It's included with every HPE nonstop server. It acts as your single repository for your security data, your audit data, and your compliance data. We've got collectors for all of the data sources that exist on nonstop. So we can collect all of that data, parse it, normalize it, enrich it, and send it off to Splunk or QRadar or whatever analytics tool you want to have. This is key for compliance and auditing. You've got it especially for PCI compliance. You need to be able to take your security data and store it in a location that cannot be tampered with. For the nonstop, Merged Audit is the HPE approved way to do this. Zygate Merged Audit would go after those data sources, collect them, parse them, and send them off to Splunk. You can check your compliance box that yes, you have collected your security data and it's properly stored. And all of that data can now be used for real-time alerting, reporting, and monitoring. And we're going to talk about how we do that in a minute. Nothing to install on any intermediate or proxy servers. Everything's fully installed on the nonstop. It's already there. You already have it. Again, if you need help turning it on, configuring it, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to turn this on for you. Start sending your data to Splunk and start seeing the value from generating alerts through Splunk. Why do you want to integrate with Splunk? And you've heard me say Splunk, Splunk, Splunk over and over. Why is this important? Well, in most environments, Splunk is your central repository for all security related data or all operational related data. So it's your central log management servers. All your logs from all your different IT assets are expected to go into Splunk. Splunk is very, very good with its analytics engine to churn through its data and make sense out of it. Unfortunately, Nonstop has some unique personality that Splunk doesn't have an understanding of. And we're going to talk about how we address that gap in a minute. But it's key. It's very, very important to send data to Splunk. It gives you immediate compliance. It allows you to address some immediate compliance and auditing risk. Allows you to do some very basic security monitoring and alerting. Allows you to monitor your applications. Gives you visibility into the nonstop data. Allows you to manage incidents and allows you to alert and report on it. Plus, it allows all of the nonstop data to play in the bigger IT infrastructure ecosystem, meaning all your data from your Windows servers and your Linux servers and your IBM servers are also going into Splunk. All of that can now be correlated with nonstop data, so you get a full 360-degree view of your entire IT infrastructure. So XYPRO, along with HPE, has delivered Zygate Merged Audit to the nonstop market for this purpose. So we can go after all of the nonstop sources and more on that left-hand side. Anything that exists on the nonstop, we can go after. If there's something in particular, come talk to us, and we've likely got a parser. We can create a parser for you. Zygate Merged Audit will collect it, process it, normalize it, and then send it to whatever analytics tool that you would like. So this can be Splunk, this can be QRadar, this can be Securonics, this can be Elastic. We can do that via syslog, we can do that via SNMP traps, we can do it via HTTPS connectors, TLS, and a variety of different formats. Again, you have this, nothing to purchase, nothing to buy. Turn it on, start using it, start sending data to Splunk. One of the newer integrations that we've brought to market this year is our Servicenow integration. If you're not familiar with Servicenow, in most environments, it's your IT ticketing system and change control system. That means before a command is executed, before a change is executed on the system, we have to validate that there is a ticket that exists in Servicenow for that change request. So you issue a privileged command or you upload a new file. You've got to make sure in most environments now that an appropriate ticket exists in ServiceNow. We've enhanced our Zygate Access Control product to integrate with ServiceNow, meaning when you issue a privileged command on the nonstop, we would now go and query ServiceNow to make sure that there is a valid ticket that exists, and only then is that command executed. So think about what we were talking about earlier. If your credentials are compromised, if your database administrator or your system administrator credentials were compromised, somebody gets on your system and starts going in and making configuration setting changes. With the ServiceNow integration, even if they have access, even if they have privilege to run those commands, unless there is a valid ticket that exists in ServiceNow, they're not going to be able to execute that command. They have access to do it, but ServiceNow is telling them no, so it stops them in their tracks right there. All of this with Zygate Access Control gets logged into a log file. So we see all of the command activity, all of the keystroke logs, all of the commands and keys that they pressed on the keyboard is all captured. That goes into a log. Merged Audit can pick up those logs and send those off to Splunk and SecurityOne for analytics. Without Zygate Access Control, you're not going to get any visibility into the commands that are being issued on the system. And this is for any environment. So you're not going to see, you're going to lose a big chunk of data necessary for analytics. So your analytics aren't going to be complete. Your analytics are going to have gaps in it, and you're not going to get an understanding of what your data means without having this type of technology in place, capturing and generating the data. If you have a need to integrate your nonstop with ServiceNow, come talk to us. We'll show you how this works. If you want to get a better understanding of what ServiceNow does, come talk to us. We'd be more than happy to discuss. And ultimately, we talked a lot about generating data. Data is key when it comes to security analytics, threat detection, and real-time risk management. What we did a couple of years ago is develop a tool called Zygate SecurityOne, with its main purpose being your unified dashboard for all of nonstop security. We said there's a big gap here in the market to address, meaning we're taking data from the nonstop, we're sending it to things like Splunk and Elk and other endpoints, and they're not able to make sense of the data. They don't understand nonstop data. They're not able, and there's gaps in that data. They're not able to understand data because, number one, it's very nonstop centric. Number two, a lot of the data is missing to do proper analytics. For example, we saw with XUA, the gaps in not having XUA versus having XUA with that loopback IP address being in there. SecurityOne introduces all kinds of technology on the nonstop that fills in a lot of those gaps. So we're able to generate the data necessary for analytics on the nonstop, take it into SecurityOne, correlate and contextualize it, meaning applying context, an understanding of that data, and then taking that data and sending it off to Splunk. So now Splunk can make more intelligent decisions based on the contextualized data it's receiving. The key here is context. We've got proven technology in the market being used by customers on 5 different continents right now. SecurityOne is deployed on 5 different continents, proven in the market for this contextualization technology. In fact, we got issued a patent on the way we're applying context. So you've got other vendors out there that claim security, intelligence, and analytics, but for the most part, they take 2 pieces of data, 2 events, combine them together because there's some commonality between them. It can be an IP address, it can be a username, it can be some other commonality in those events. They'll link those 2 events together and create a new event. Now you've got to make sense of what that data means, what that new piece of data means. Is it something I need to pay attention to, or is it something I can ignore? That takes time, that takes effort. What context does is we do the same type of correlation. We'll take 2 events, put them together because there's some commonality between them, and then we'll apply context to that new event to tell you if it's something that you need to pay attention to or it's benign and you can ignore it. How we do that is because we've got an understanding of your system, your users, your behavior, your processes, your applications, a variety of different factors that we're bringing into the picture to evaluate that new event, to tell you, yes, this is important, or no, you can ignore that. Now, when we do that, we're doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you and presenting you with information that then you can use to make decisions, actionable information that you can then make decisions on. This reduces the time your staff has to spend on forensic and investigations. It reduces false positives, and it gives you immediate value for actionable data. It really transforms that raw data into information. We do that in a tiered approach. We use 3 different methods. The first one being data ingestion. We talked about the importance of having a complete data set. The more data we have, the more intelligent decisions we can make. Secondly, we're using rules and signatures. This is standard out of the box. We've got a very, very large library of use cases that come out of SecurityOne that's applicable to every nonstop environment. You can then customize those rules. You can create new rules from existing rules. You can take those templates and modify them to apply to certain users or groups or IP addresses, or you can turn off certain rules, or you can take individual events using our visual rule builder and link those events together to create new events that don't exist. And then the third tier is machine learning algorithms. We're profiling your systems, your users, your applications, your activity over time to get an understanding of what's normal. That way we can flag what's not normal and bring to your attention. This becomes critical to detect those malicious insiders that we were talking about. If a database administrator does certain activity in a certain sequence on a given day, we're going to see that over time. If they do something different, if they do something that they haven't done in the past, we're going to see that because that's abnormal behavior. We're going to flag that and we're going to say, pay attention to that. That's why it's so critical to have proper machine learning algorithms that are based on context, so we understand what a user behavior looks like, what's appropriate for that platform, for that application, for that user, to be able to pull out what's not normal. Typical machine learning algorithms are based on a lot of false positives because they don't introduce the layer of context necessary to reduce the false positives. We do. SecurityOne's delivered as a modular platform, meaning nothing to, this is all browser-based, web-based. You install a web server and the application goes in as modules. You can license one or as many modules as you would like. As your needs grow, you can just contact CyberSecurity, get a license key, turn on additional modules. Nothing to install on the client end. You just log into a URL and take full advantage of SecurityOne. You can deploy SecurityOne on a Windows server, Linux server, or in the cloud. We've got instances in Azure, we've got instances in AWS, we've got instances in GCP, or in your private cloud. Again, patented technology. Nobody else has the ability to generate the data, the analytics, and the context that we do. One of the most important modules out of the gate, and this is the one that probably provides the most bang for the buck, is our file and system integrity monitoring. This is the modernized approach to file and system integrity monitoring that has existed on Nonstop. This is real-time ability to detect changes in your file, on your files, on your users, on your system configuration, but not just detecting a change. We're telling you who, what, when, where, why, and how. We're giving you all of the information necessary and cutting down all of the investigation that you need to do. So if a file changes, we're telling you who did it, what they did, what was the value before, what is the new value, what is the activity they did before that change, what is the activity they did after that change. Same thing with a configuration setting being modified. We'll be able to tell you if that change not only put your system at risk, but if it violated any compliance rule. You can click on any object and you can see its entire history. You can see when it's been modified, how it's been modified, who modified it, what the previous values were, what the new values were, see the full life cycle. You can also do all kinds of trending and analytics on that data. Again, without the modules, without the Zygate modules that exist on SecurityOne, this data would be unavailable to any other system. Our newest module is our compliance module. This is, if you're familiar with things like Qualys and Tenable that do PCI and other security framework compliance monitoring, the interface is going to look very similar. So it's all big numbers, green, red, good, bad. In this screenshot, we can see requirements to PCI requirements 1 through 12. I can click on, for example, requirement 8, and I can see what's failing underneath it. I can click on the failing sub-requirement and I can see why it's failing and what I need to do to address it. I can print out reports from here, and all of this is done in real time. We've got PCI DSS in here. We've got HP hardening guide in here. And if there's additional compliance frameworks that you would like to see in here, we can deliver this via compliance packs, which you would upload and immediately have access to an entire new rule set. One of our newer modules is also our Appliance Sentry module. This gives us visibility into the appliances that are connected to your nonstop. These are your CLIMs, these are your Windows consoles, these are other appliances that you might have connected to your nonstop. These are all part of your ecosystem and need to be looked at equally. They need to be secured just like you would secure your operating system. So, but a lot of times they don't give visibility. This gives us the eyes and the ears necessary to know how they're secured, who's accessing them, and if there are any risks that exist on them. The goal here is getting these to a green, healthy state and making sure that they stay on a green state. So these are all based on the CIS benchmarks that exist, and we're evaluating across 200 some odd different compliance rules and telling you where you're most at risk and what you need to do to address it. Sometimes it's running a command, sometimes it's installing an update, sometimes it might be contacting HPE, or in some cases, your CLIMs are old enough where they need to be updated and because they won't support the new security updates. But this gives you a visibility into the CLIMs that everybody was lacking on nonstop up until this point. Similarly, with the Appliance Sentry module, that monitors the nonstop console, we're able now to tell you what the health of your Windows console is. We'll tell you who's logging on there. We can tell you if your firewalls are turned on or off. We can tell you if your antivirus is up to date. We can tell you which Windows updates are installed, what's missing, all of that in a single pane of glass view. Normally, your Windows console falls into a dead area, meaning the nonstop people don't have the tools or the expertise to manage a Windows server, and the cybersecurity team says that's part of the nonstop ecosystem, so they go hands off on it. But the console is critical to secure properly because it has all kinds of management capabilities for the rest of your nonstop. It's got the ability to log into all kinds of backplane systems and that type of data available to it. So it's got to be secured properly. This not only secures it, but gives you visibility into what's happening with it. Ultimately, the business value SecurityOne brings into the picture is saving cost, it's simplifying compliance activity, it's modernizing the nonstop security processes. We want to improve your staff's productivity. The volume, variety, and velocity of the data is not decreasing. We're increasing data every single day, and humans just cannot keep up with it. So we need to augment your security resources and give them a fighting chance, because the adversaries have all kinds of time and money and ability to strategize and mobilize, while we're just getting more, we're having to look for a needle in a haystack while more hay is being piled on. We need the tools, we need the processes, we need the technology that can help us give us a fighting chance. Like I said, we've got SecurityOne's proven in the market. We've got a variety of customers using it. In fact, there's a presentation later on this week by HDFC Bank in India talking about their usage of SecurityOne. And this is a presentation Pulse Discover Financial Services did last year. Tanya Jones did a presentation on their usage of SecurityOne and the benefits that they're seeing as far as real-time threat detection and compliance reporting that they're seeing value from. That being said, I appreciate everybody's time today. I know this was a lot of information. I'm hoping we at least set the building blocks there to help you start thinking about security in a new way. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to address those. Either email me, reach out to me on Twitter, or I'll be in the chat room. So thank you, everybody.